Delighted to have Gemma with me from People Building this afternoon. And I've invited Gemma on because one is mental health is huge on the agenda lately, and Gemma's got some really useful insights to both employees and business owners. In fact, anyone that needs the help. So we're going to talk about that. And also, we've got a very, I guess, there's a shared philosophy. I met Gemma and had a really good conversation with her the other day, and I think we really share and care about people and making them get the changes that they need. But perhaps before we go into it, Gemma, do you want to introduce yourself and what you do?
Yes, thank you very much. And thank you for having me. So I'm Gemma Bailey. I'm the director of People Building, which is a personal development company. And we train people in a couple of modalities that are really our strong suits. So one is neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP. Lots of people in the corporate arena have heard of NLP before because it may have been involved in some training that you've attended, particularly for leaders and managers, or for rapport building and sales techniques and those sorts of things. So it's really a useful tool for anyone who's working with interpersonal relationships. The other modality that we teach at People Building is hypnotherapy, which is hypnosis but for therapeutic purposes. Okay. And some of our practitioners there are also qualified in CBT, which is cognitive behavior therapy. That's one that most people tend to be quite aware of. A lot of people have heard of CBT already. And CBT and NLP do actually overlap quite a bit. There is definitely some parallels between them.
For the benefit of everyone, Gemma, do you just want to give a really basic definition? Because sometimes people they know these things, but they don't.
Yeah, 100%. So CBT is a series of different strategies that are used to intercept your thought processes. And the philosophy behind it is that when you take care of what's going on in your thoughts, it's going to have a positive effect on how you're running your emotions, so that you start to feel as if you have greater control over your emotional state. And also, you know, those negative thoughts that might otherwise run away with you, you start to learn how to keep those in check. So like anything, it's a series of tools that you need to actually use in order to get the benefit from them. But the more you use them over time, the more natural it becomes for you to opt towards those first. So you start to use those as a new way of thinking, as opposed to your old unhelpful ways of thinking. And NLP definitely has all of those sorts of elements in the mix. So NLP also is made up of different techniques and tools and strategies. And I would say the way it differs from CBT is we focus a little more on helping people manage their emotions in order to change how they're thinking. So as well as having procedures that are designed to intercept those negative thought patterns, maybe stop you from beating yourself over the head with a big stick and telling yourself bad things about yourself. We've also got the strategies that are useful for actually, in the moment, I'm feeling bad. Maybe I can't pin down the thought right now. I need to do something that's going to interrupt this feeling. And as a result of interrupting the feeling, then it starts to change the way that you're thinking. So in NLP, we kind of go both ways. We go thoughts to feelings, and we also go from feelings to thoughts. We've got some very specific strategies in NLP that can be helpful as well for dealing with things like phobias, maybe traumas that have happened in sort of other aspects of life as well. So there are some very specific processes that we use for very specific circumstances.
And briefly on the hypnotherapy side? Yeah.
So it's hypnosis, but for therapeutic reasons. So it's not that, like, I don't slip into my Paul McKenna voice and have people dancing around like a chicken, although I have done that, but that's not what we do. The reason why hypnosis... The reason why hypnosis can be helpful for someone is, so I think most people have an understanding that you have something called a conscious mind, which is where you do all that internal jibber jabber. They're the thoughts that you're aware of. And then you have your unconscious mind. And that's where the things that you do automatically happen. So, you know, walking up and down the stairs, you don't have to think about how to do it. Assuming you've mastered it by now, then it's going to happen on an unconscious level. And so most of our behaviors and habits are kind of situated in the unconscious mind. And therefore, if we want to change certain behaviors and habits, that's where the work needs to be done. Now, when someone's in a very relaxed state, so if you've ever had the feeling of falling asleep in front of the television or whilst you're listening to an audiobook.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Friday night. Film's rubbish, obviously.
Yeah. And you kind of know it's still there in the background, like you can still hear it and process it, but
Yep.
you're also not awake anymore either. You're like, I know it's there, but I can't be bothered to switch it off. That's a little bit like the state of hypnosis, because hypnosis isn't actually being asleep, even though the word hypnos means sleep. It's not as deep as being asleep. It's that space in between awakeness and sleepiness. And when you're in that state, it's much easier for your brain to process incoming information, and you're more suggestible to suggestions that you might be given to change or improve something. So the reason why we use hypnosis is sometimes because we want to bypass that critical conscious mind that a particular client might have that gets in the way of them perhaps using some of the change work tools from NLP or CBT or really anything else in the psychotherapy spectrum. If they're very resistant, then hypnosis can be a nice way for us to bypass some of that resistance. The other reason we might use hypnosis is because we want to sort of lock in the changes that we've already made, so that it takes the pressure off of the client having to really be on top of themselves in making sure that they keep doing things in this new, more useful way, and having to constantly rehearse doing those things in that new useful way. We can actually rehearse them a lot more quickly and easily in hypnosis. So it's a nice way for us to sort of accelerate that change process. So yeah, those are our sort of main modalities.
Nice. And you've got a team of professionals that do they cover all those three aspects that you...
So between all of us, we do. Not everyone has the same qualifications in all areas. Everyone is qualified in NLP. Some but not all are qualified in hypnotherapy. Some but not all have CBT under their belts as well. I'm also a psychologist. So we've got a few different threads between us as a team, but all of us have the NLP in common.
And just for my benefit and the benefit of those that watch this recording, look, we all have mental health.
Yes.
How does someone know? Obviously, they don't need to pick whether they need CBT or NLP themselves, but how does somebody know? What might be some of the typical things be to give you a call?
Yeah, good question. I would say, and obviously we're talking a lot here today about what shows up for people in the workplace, but it doesn't have to be that your issues are in the workplace, right? Because let's face it, if something bad happens at home, it can affect your performance in the workplace. So it's not really about what's the environment that you're in. It's really more to do with that sort of biofeedback experience that you're having in life of how am I feeling? How am I behaving? How am I reacting? What are my thoughts doing? And if any of those start to feel like they're out of whack, then that's probably something that needs at least a little bit of looking at, a bit of a magnifying glass on it. And how it manifests itself for someone could be stress, anxiety, depression. If you've got a low level habit of, I don't know, a glass of wine on a Thursday evening, and then that's suddenly increased to 4 glasses of wine on a Wednesday, Thursday and Friday evening, then you can see that something in your behavior has shifted. So that might be an indication that something needs to change. I would say typically there is something that's happening in either the thoughts or the feelings that people identify as, okay, something's not quite right here, this needs looking at.
Yeah, sometimes, quite a lot of the time, I think in my experience anyway, that people are either in denial of that.
Yes.
Or sometimes they might retreat away from that. Now, I guess there's, to some extent, if they completely deny it and retreat and nobody speaks to them, then you're not going to discover it.
Yes.
So, but look at it from the other way. There'll be a load of leaders, managers.
Yeah.
What's the best practice for a great leader and manager?
Yeah.
To make sure that they can identify signs. What do they do? What advice would you give anyone leading people, managing people?
There's a few things I think that can be really important here. So the first thing I'll say is that it's completely okay for someone to have a bad day, and we don't necessarily need to chalk it up to a mental health issue. So we're looking at something that is persistent or consistent. You know, it's happening for a period of time and it's happening somewhat consistently over that period of time. I think where leaders, managers, employers can really help themselves to stay on top of this, because let's face it, I'm an employer as well, and I've had employees with mental health challenges, even though we're a mental health company that's providing wellness, you know. Yeah. So it still happens to us too. And I think a really useful thing is having a relationship, like making sure that your employees have a relationship with someone that they can report to, which may be your HR person, it may be their line manager, but there needs to be that freedom to speak around these things. And it's really, I would say, only since the lockdowns happened that as adults we've become much freer in talking about mental wellness. I think before that it was still a little bit like we were all a bit tender and shy about talking about this stuff somewhat.
Absolutely, man. There are still stigmas out there, aren't there?
100%.
You know, I'd like to. I tried to repeat this. Like, we all have mental health.
Exactly.
We all have. Yeah. We all have physical health.
Yes. Yeah. It's exactly the same.
Some are healthier than others.
Yes.
And I guess the key difference, and I'm not a doctor, but is that the mental health can change a lot quicker than physical health.
Yes, absolutely. Moment to moment, there are things that can affect us in our environment, or maybe something that triggers an unwanted thought that can then lead us into a spiral. So yeah, it can be incredibly changeable when it comes to mental health. I would say if you have, for example, a very large team, or you perhaps have a team where you think, actually, we don't really have that open, honest dialogue around mental health yet, there are other things you can still do, you know, things like even anonymous questionnaires or surveys that you send out to your team, where you just kind of like gauge the vibe, you know, how are people feeling when they're coming to work? How are they managing their stress? Do they have concerns that are perhaps happening outside of the workplace that might be affecting them when they're in the workplace because their head's elsewhere other than on the job that they should be doing? So I think that there's always going to be, in some cases, quite a creative way to figure out, well, what's going on with my team? Are they in the right headspace? Yep. Are they feeling good about being here and doing the job that they're doing? And really sort of making it an important part of what you do as an employer, that this is now something that, like you say, we're taking care of this as much as we might do health and safety in the workplace.
Actually, yeah, because people are important.
Yes, so we want them to keep coming to work.
Both because we're human.
Yes.
And that is to celebrate anyway. But then, you know, from a business perspective, I maintain that people are still, even with AI and all the tech that exists, they're still your main source of competitive advantage.
Absolutely. And, you know, one of the things to bear in mind as well is that maybe 20 years ago, the leading source of absenteeism in the workplace was the bad back. It's not the bad back anymore. It's mental health. So if you want to know that your employees are fit for work and that they're going to remain fit for work, then we want to do the preventative stuff and not just dealing with it after someone's signed off sick for 2 weeks.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we often suggest to people a thing as simple as just asking at the beginning of a one-to-one meeting, how are you feeling?
Yeah.
It gives them, and over time, it just gives them the excuse to say, I was up all night, the baby was screaming, whatever is going on in their life that could be impacting their work.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily impact the targets, what they need to do in their job, but people are human and can be empathetic, aren't they?
Yes, 100%. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you for that explanation. I was going to talk all day about that.
I know.
One of the key things that, and the reason for doing this, wasn't it, is that you told me about something called access to work.
Yes.
The other day, and I thought, more people need to know about that.
Yes.
So can you tell us what Access to Work is?
Of course. So Access to Work is a government fund that came in after the series of lockdowns that we had, and it is a fund available to employees. You can be properly employed, self-employed, an apprentice, an intern, or about to start long-term employment. And it's a fund that's available to assist people with disabilities. Now, of course, the term disability is also very much a sort of umbrella term. It's a big spectrum. It's very wide reaching. So this could mean physical disabilities or sensory impairments, but it also applies to this whole mental health bracket that we've just been referring to. And so as well as employees who may have some challenges around their mental health, there are employees that we may have who have neurodiversities, which also affect the way in which they work, or perhaps they have personality disorders, and that may affect them at work as well. So this fund is specifically for people who fall into that disability bracket, either because of the physical disability or the mental health. And
do they have to have a diagnosed mental ill
it does
health
not
condition?
need to be diagnosed. No, so you do not need to have a diagnosis to be able to access this fund. What does need to be the case is that this affects your ability to do your job, or it could affect your ability to stay in your job. So for example, if you are a company director who maybe you suspect you've got a touch of ADHD, but you don't have a diagnosis yet, but what you do have is a high level of anxiety because you've got that sort of wired sense around you that might come with having something like ADHD. And perhaps you find it difficult to keep on top of your to-do list, or you are attempting to multitask, which never works anyway. And so things get very overwhelming for you. You're perhaps not meeting deadlines, or you're just generally very stressed out. That would classify for being eligible to tap into this fund and to get some coaching and assistance for yourself. And then that coach might be in a position to say, okay, well, let's have a look at how you structure your to-do list. Let's have a look at the urgent versus important tasks that you're doing. Let's have a think about some mindfulness strategies that are going to help you to stay on top of that stress and anxiety. And so I guess really that's part of where we come in. So we assist employers and employees to be able to make an application for Access to Work. We go through the whole application process with them, so that we can assist you in making sure it's got the best possible chance of success, and to double check that you are actually eligible as well.
Okay, so a quick chat with one of your team will define whether they will fall in it or not.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're going to make sure that you know from the outset whether this is worthwhile you pursuing. And if it is, the application process itself takes about 16 weeks. So we always say, if you're thinking about this, start sooner rather than later, because it might be 16 weeks before you hear something back. So the application itself can be done with our team. We can even work as an advocate for you, so that you don't have to speak to anybody. As soon as they want to kind of acknowledge that the applications come in, they can let us know. If they've got any questions, then they can speak to us about what your application says and what your needs might be.
Okay.
And then from there, typically what happens if you're working with us is that we'll apply for 10 initial sessions, which are coaching sessions that one of our team will provide. And remember, we're not just business coaches, we're coming from that therapeutic angle in terms of what we deliver and the service that we offer. And then after those initial 10 sessions, then it typically falls into either bi-weekly or monthly coaching sessions, and that can go on for another year or however long might be needed. So the actual pot of funding that's available per employee is £66,000 per year. If you have less than, it is quite a lot, isn't it? Yeah, and you can reapply again the next year as well. So yeah, and I guess, you know, that makes sense for people who have perhaps more serious physical disabilities. They might need physical equipment in order to make their job easier for them to do. And some of that equipment is going to be blooming expensive sometimes. So the fund does need to be big. I will add as well, it has gone up every year since the fund has started. So right now it's in the region of £66,000. It started out at 40. So it's really crept up over the last few years since lockdown actually happened. Other things to know, so if you have less than 50 employees, as an employer, you typically do not need to make any financial contribution to this whatsoever. Everything is covered by access to work.
Perfect way for a small SME to support their workforce where they need it most, whether it's physical or mental health related.
Exactly. If you have above 50 employees, you can still apply, and depending on how many you have, then there are different tiers and thresholds that dictate what level of contribution you might need to make as an employer, and how frequently you might need to make that contribution, but still the bulk of the cost is covered by access to work. So even for the larger organizations, this is still something that is well worth their while looking into.
Yeah, because they'll be paying a fraction of the cost that they would otherwise.
Exactly.
To give due care and look after their employee.
Yes, 100%.
Excellent. It sounds like, again, it sounds like an amazing scheme.
Yes,
We'll have to share some more information and link to the stuff below this so people can access this and take advantage.
Yeah, absolutely. Listen, we don't know how long the fund will be available for. You know, if there's a change of government in the future, then obviously all of this could change and no longer be available. So this is why we're saying to people, look, this exists. We want to make the most of this while the support is there and available for you. And ultimately, like we said at the very beginning, this is about just being kind to other humans. If there's things that we can do that help people to maintain their sense of dignity and the self-esteem and connection that they get from coming to work and being able to stay in their job, because there are so many other things that we get from working, not just, you know, the paycheck at the end of the month. It does an awful lot to support us on a social level and with our sort of personal interactions, the relationships that we build. It forms a lot of who we are. So we want people to be able to maintain their jobs if they can.
Lovely. And what would you say to somebody that, I don't know, say they're a business owner, they've got a team of 25 people,
yeah,
they don't actually know if they've got anyone in their team that might qualify. Let's not judge them for that. Let's just assume that they don't know.
Yeah.
What would they do? How could you help them?
Well, I think the key thing is you find the right way for your team, however you normally would communicate with them, assuming that you do, to ask the question, you know, does anybody have a need that maybe ties in with this fund so that we can support you in being able to do your job better, to feel more committed to staying in your job, to feel more secure when you're in the workplace or more comfortable here. So there needs to be a process. So that might be that you ping out a newsletter. It might be that you send out a survey. If you've got the kind of relationships to be able to go around and speak to people, or in your one-to-ones that you might be delivering, you know, those would probably be some really useful ways to sort of go, okay, well, have we got a need here for some of our people? And if so, are they open to the idea? Because obviously the fund is for the employee. All right. So, and actually on that note, if you have 20 employees and all 20 of them need support, all 20 of them can apply. So this is not ring fenced in any way. It's not capped by the employee's level of earnings. If they receive any other benefits, it won't affect their benefits in any other way. Okay. So those are all sort of useful things to know as well. And an employer can always book in for a consultation chat with us to find out a little bit more and maybe even get some ideas about, well, I've got someone on my team that I think this could be really appropriate for, but I don't know how to approach this conversation with them. How do I do that?
That's really good to know, because it sounds like the scope of this, as you said quite earlier, is quite broad. You don't necessarily have to have a diagnosed mental ill health condition. So it might apply to more people.
Yes.
Than they would think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it could be, and I think we've probably all had an experience of this in our lives, not necessarily in the workplace, but, you know, we probably all know someone where we suspect there's something going on for them, you know, kind of like, oh, I think they might be on the spectrum in some way, but you're not going to have that conversation with them because you're not their practitioner, you're not their psychologist, but you kind of have an inkling. And if you can have some degree of communication with that person where you say, look, I think it might be useful for us to apply for some coaching for you. You don't have to say to them, it's because I think there's something that's, you know, neurodiverse that's going on for you. You don't need to be the person to diagnose that. You can make sure that they get the support that they need, and then hand over to the professional, because if there's a conversation to be had, then that's something that a professional should be having with them.
So one of your team would meet them to go through the application, would they?
We do, yeah. So typically what happens is we have a sort of introductory conversation with the employer, or sometimes the employers sort of put themselves forward without talking to their employer yet. So we'll have a conversation about how they should do that, and cover that side of things. And then we go through a much longer consultation process where we find out a little bit about their backstory, what's perhaps led them to think that some coaching would be valuable for them. We'll double check that they meet all the criteria for being able to complete the application. And then at that stage, we can either say, this is how you move forward and apply, or most likely we'll say, let's put the application in for you so that we can, really make sure that we've set it out in a way that's going to get you the support that you need. And we move forward from there.
That's interesting. You raised there that somebody might come, so an employee could come to you independently?
They can do, yes. So we would always recommend that you talk to your employer about it, particularly if, as we said, they may be over that sort of 50 employees limit, in which case the employer is going to need to be involved anyway, because they may need to make a financial contribution. But we've certainly had it where employees have reached out to us independently, and then we've discussed with them, okay, this is what we want, this is the information we want you to go back to your employer with, and the sorts of things you might need to say to them about it. When the funding is made available from Access to Work, typically the employer will pay for the first couple of sessions and then you claim it back. So just like anything that's government funded, they don't make it straightforward. They're not going to give you all the money up front. They're going to give you enough for a couple of sessions, but you're going to need to pay for those sessions yourself first and claim it back. When you claim it back, you have to send it in by good old fashioned Royal Mail post. So there's no nifty website form for you to fill out here. So it is a slow process, but you will get your funding returned to you if you've paid in advance for your sessions.
Okay, so you do need to involve the employee.
Yes, so if you're self-employed or you're an employee in a smaller organization, technically you can fund the sessions yourself and claim it back. But usually if you're employed, it will be your employer that pays for those first few sessions and they do the claim for you.
Yeah, I don't know. Just thinking there might be a situation. Who knows? Somebody's mental ill health could be caused by how they're treated by somebody in the workplace.
Yes, which might make it clunky.
Put them in a real great need for your service, but a dilemma in terms of tapping into it.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I would say we have to take everyone on a case-by-case basis. So it's always worthwhile having a conversation with us over at People Building. So as I say, if there's a way that we can sort of creatively work with you to help you come up with the right way to have those conversations that you might need to have with your colleagues or your employer to move things forward, then, even if it comes down to us drafting out the letter for you or with you, we've got an HR support service that we use as well. And sometimes, they're sort of cross-referencing with us around some of the Access to Work stuff. So we can always help someone out with that.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Gemma, for joining us and sharing this great opportunity for both employees and people, really.
Thank you very much for having me.
People, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for having me here today.
Thank you very much, and we'll share full details of how you can get in touch with Gemma and find out more about this. Thank you.
Thank you.